Story 1. A lot of fights, a lot of mental illness, a lot of yelling, a lot of crying, a lot of immature people, including guards and inmates, cramped quarters with up to 5 to 6 inmates per cell designed for 2. The one thing you are not prepared for is the smell. Story 2. That is the worst part of it. Aside from the bad food and fights, the worst thing is the boredom. You will never physically walk more in your life if you are in jail. I never served a long term, but did have multiple instances of having to serve for a few days to weeks when I was younger for drug possession, reckless driving, failure to appear, and other offenses. I definitely do not fit the jail personality, but as long as you stay looking straight and do not talk to anybody, you are good. Most of the time, if you stay this way and are genuinely a good person, you will find yourself around the jail bros, those who do not participate in rowdy jail behavior and are just counting the days. Like the wise old man who reads his books in the corner. I always ended up being cool with those types, the more quiet, out-of-the-way people. That is who you want to be. Just serve your time, do some push-ups, and watch your little television. Do not try to make friends. The people there are not your friends. Jail is not the place to network. Do not try to be cool, loud, tough, or fake, and you will usually be fine. Also, for the love of God, do not complain, especially in front of other inmates who have been there a long time. This is very common right after the arrest when you are put in holding with a group of others. It will come off as woe is me, and they will not appreciate it. You will seem entitled and likely to anger the pod. Story 3. Spent a few days in a county jail in Georgia. I was 18, small, skinny, and had long hair. Catcalls were constant, mostly just to bother me. It was cold, the bed was hard, and the lights were always on. There were books to read, cards, and board games. It was not fun, but not hell either. My friend at the time was sent to a different block, which apparently had all of the old stoners, and he said it was a blast. Story 4. I spent a night in the holding cell, which is not really jail, but it definitely cured me from ever wanting to find out what real jail is like. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. The highlight of that night was watching a man take his shoe off, dip water out of the toilet bowl into his shoe, and then drink it. He was immediately sent to the psychiatric wing of the hospital for a 72-hour psychiatric hold. Story 5. Long periods of extreme boredom, marked by constant dehumanization and fleeting moments of intense violence, all enveloped in the most deliberate and lazy incompetence I have ever experienced in life. Story 6. They feed you thin oatmeal. Oatmeal sandwiches. Oatmeal omelets. Nothing but oatmeal. Plus, you can eat your own hair. Story 7. I was in a female prison, so my experience is always different from the males. It always shocks people when I tell them about the amount of sex. My cellmate and I were constantly doing it, and I wouldn't even consider myself a lesbian. I think a lot of it is boredom and wanting some kind of companionship. You go in straight and leave straight. But it's the gayest place on earth besides an all-girls Catholic school. If a correctional officer caught us, we did get in trouble. A lot of inmates were sleeping with correctional officers and other staff. One of the janitors had 4 or 5 girls because he brought them things. Which brings me to my next point. Period products were like currency. The joke was always that cigarettes are currency in jail. For women, it's tampons, pads, even diapers. That janitor would bring in a pack of pads and was considered a king. If you let someone bully you, you will end up as their victim. Prison breaks you if you let it. People can talk about prison reform all they want. At the bare minimum, someone shouldn't go to prison and come out a worse criminal. I say this because we had a girl come into the system. 19, white girl, innocent good girl type. By the time I left, she was broken. Tattoos, smuggling drugs from her parents, part of a pretty bad group. And she was their victim. I can't imagine what they were doing to her. When she was supposed to get discharged, she assaulted a correctional officer so she could stay. Story 8. I spent 3 months in jail with more than 99 other inmates. There were no closed cells, just all of us in one big 2-story loft. I'm a skinny, white, nerdy-looking guy, and mostly everyone was generally pretty nice to me. When I say nice, I don't mean like, hey, welcome neighbor. More like no one really bothered me. I made friends with people from all races. I got bullied a handful of times, but nothing serious. Everyone seemed to just want to play cards and relax, thankfully. The food was terrible. Being woken up at 4 a.m. was difficult, but not having contact with your loved ones was the worst part. Overall, my experience wasn't at all like the movies. I spent my time reading, drawing, playing cards, and so on. I won't say time went fast. It was painfully slow, the longest 3 months of my life. Story 9. What if you are an introvert and just want to keep to yourself? Not talk to anyone, and spend time writing? Story 10. I think you need to distinguish between jail, which is the detention while awaiting trial, and prison, which is where you are sent after conviction. Story 11. My wife is an attorney and has handled several excessive use of force allegations in jails. What these correctional officers and guards do is disgusting and disturbing. Additionally, there are cover-ups. Story 12. I was in jail for about 4 days and it was very unpleasant. The booking process is extremely inefficient. The food is poor. There is absolutely nothing to do, and the guards do not provide any information. No pillows, one change of clothes, and a thin blanket are all you receive. The worst part for me was not knowing what was going to happen. You can feel how the entire place is designed to punish you beyond just removing you from society. It definitely made me reconsider choices that could lead me back there. I will say that everyone in my temporary holding pod was calm, although there were many people withdrawing from fentanyl. Another surprisingly brutal experience was the caffeine withdrawal. I have never had a worse headache in my life. Story 13. I worked in a county jail for 6 years. Smells bad. It is loud. The inmates are rude, and sometimes you have to fight them. I would not recommend it. Story 14. It is just so boring. Time slows to a crawl. I had to serve 90 days for 1 joint of cannabis when I was 22. Almost 15 years ago. So dumb. Story 15. I got work release 5 days each week, so that helped, but the 2 days I was required not to use work release were difficult. Time went very slowly. All I did was play solitaire and keep to myself. Story 16. You know that scene from The Butterfly Effect where the Nazis pick on Ashton Kutcher and start to forcibly harm him or beat him to death? It is absolutely nothing like that. It is like a grown-up after-school detention that lasts longer. Story 17. The summer camp you did not sign up for. My area was more rural, so it was mostly drugs and domestic violence, occasional violent mentally ill without proper help, or in my case, violation of probation that I thought was completed 3 months prior over a small amount of marijuana. Women's unit. Large one-person cell because that was all there was for the women. 1 hour of outside time was usually cut short because of the Georgia heat. In the middle of the afternoon. Went to church once a week just to leave the cell. Pulled over at 2 a.m., booked in at 9 a.m., sat in holding cell forgotten until someone else was brought into the holding cell around 7 a.m. I say forgotten because the officer who brought the person in said, "Wow, I did not know anyone was in here." I was 19 and definitely sheltered for the majority of my life compared to what I was interacting with. Story 18. I was kind of into it at the time. I was 18 and had nothing but bad influences around me, strung out on drugs. It was like a 30-day vacation in rehabilitation. Looking back, it was really good for me. I appreciate the humbling experience it gave me. Story 19. It is just a way to house your body. You do nothing. You have nothing. It is boring and you are just processed. Story 20. Really uncomfortable in every way imaginable. There is almost nothing to do. The guards dislike you. The other inmates also dislike you. When you get out, society often has an excuse, whether justified or not, to dislike you as well. Going to jail is very unpleasant. Prison, however, is like attending a life college. You can either figure things out or continue making mistakes and failing life's lessons. Story 21. Poor food. Poor customer service. They have lines on the floor that they say you should not step over, then get mad at you for stepping over. How else was I supposed to read the sign warning me about rabid bats in the recreation yard? Story 22. I was only in for booking at the county jail and was given a signature bond after 3 days. Couple of things stood out. The smell was awful, as everyone else says. 8 guys in a 20 by 20 foot room. It was unpleasant. One guy who looked like Saddam Hussein was using the toilet behind the curtain frequently. and we might as well have been sitting on his lap. It felt like they were intentionally keeping you sleep deprived. People were moved between cells regularly, and the checks in the middle of the night forced you to get out of your bunk and stand with the lights on, ensuring there was no decent duration of sleep. The food was bad to the point that I just didn't eat. Other people ate my food and drank my powdered electrolyte drink, which was fine with me. There were normal guys, gang members, one guy had submachine gun tattoos under his eyes, people with alcohol withdrawals. You saw all kinds of people. Everyone claimed to be innocent, and many wanted to talk about why they were there and why it wasn't their fault. I kept my mouth shut and stayed in my bunk until my name was called for my hearing. No one cared that I wasn't talking, thank God. Story 23. It depends, honestly. Are you talking about county jail, state prison, or federal prison? Also, it depends on the state you are in, as jail policies differ. Story 24. You play a lot of cards, particularly spades from my experience. There is also a lot of storytelling, most of which is probably nonsense. Story 25. Very boring. Most of the people there are overgrown children who are never going to get their life together. They see the guards as parental figures that they are always in conflict with instead of individuals doing a job and not thinking about them after they go home. I did not stay long enough to get too involved in the inner politics. Unless you were talking to me about books or chess, I just ignored you. It worked. Just looking at people and not saying anything made most people leave you alone. Story 26. Unpleasant, boring, and frightening. Imagine being highly vigilant and on edge or simply bored. That is essentially the main idea. Story 27. Crazy how different German versus United States prison is. I wasn't in jail, but a friend was, and he told me he had a TV, bed, and wardrobe in his cell, more like a normal room. It also depends on what you did. Story 28. I actually managed to sneak out a set of hand-drawn maps and drawings of jail from the inside. Too bad it got destroyed. I can probably still draw 98% from memory, though. Have you seen Ander? Jail is very much like Narkina 5. Again, it varies heavily by location and by what you did and what your personal circumstances are. Jail is a very personal experience. I was in jail 3 times, one for about a day, one for 3 weeks, and the last one was about an hour or 2. All misdemeanors. The last one was about 4 years ago. I want to reply in more detail but cannot at the moment, so I am staking my spot. Story 29. Cold, bright, hungry. Some people literally never stop talking. Hearing bang bang bang. If you were white you were gonna die tonight, on repeat from the guy on segregation was a nice touch. Story 30. I have never been in jail, but I have a friend who served time for something he did not do. It was a terrible experience. For one, the food provided was only enough to meet basic emergency calorie intake, around 1,000 calories. Despite eating every morsel given to him, he lost a significant amount of weight. He had to constantly avoid people trying to pick fights with him because, in jail, if you are involved in a fight, it goes on your record, even if you were just defending yourself. A fight is a fight, and extra time can be added to your sentence. About a week before he was to be released, a new inmate was placed in his cell. This person continually antagonized my friend and tried to provoke fights. My friend believed this was a deliberate attempt to extend his time in prison. Fortunately, he was allowed to move to another cell. We visited him often and emailed as much as possible. Despite the support, he never smiled once. Story 31. Not jail, but the tank. I had been up for days on methamphetamine and was experiencing full psychosis in public. They placed me in the tank. I was so thin that I could not stand. There was no padding on my feet, so it felt like I was standing on bone, and it hurt badly. I should have been in the hospital, but I had no insurance. I guess they normally keep people in there for 24 hours, but I was there for 4 days. I saw the same people coming and going night after night, and they would say, "That person is still in here?" I lay on a stinky cot next to a wall, and the pattern on the wall looked like weird shiny gold bricks. After a couple of days, when I started sobering up enough to stop hallucinating, I realized they were not bricks. They were little gold plaques with the names of every person who had died in that room, died right where I was lying. There were so many of them. It saddened me so much that it contributed to me hitting bottom. I got clean and never went back. Story 32. Honestly, I spent 24 hours in and it was so peaceful. I had a lot of stress and challenges in life. Going there, I had nothing to do but read a book and meditate. Story 33. The jail I went to was very uneventful and boring. At least there was a TV outside every cell, I guess. There was one lady going through some difficult situation, non-stop screaming. She was the only real annoyance. Story 34. Did 30 days. It's really loud. Everyone talks very loudly. For some inmates, it's like a class reunion. I mostly minded my own business and was respectful to everyone, and that got me pretty far. Even the toughest inmates appreciated that I showed them respect. I shared my things without being a pushover. I got into a small confrontation with a younger inmate, my cellmate, and that earned me more respect because I didn't allow disrespect. Also, no one washed their hands. I hated that part. Story 35. I was in jail for 1 week and have hours of stories from my time, but I have to say, it was a unique experience. Jail has a rough reputation, but during my time inside, I met a couple of chill guys, read 1.5 books, and came away with many interesting anecdotes. The biggest challenge during my time was loneliness. I was arrested 2 days before Christmas, so I spent the holiday alone in intake, whistling carols to myself. Story 36. Isolation unit with a paper gown. It tears every time you toss and turn, so you end up like a naked ferret trying to keep warm under shredded newspaper. Story 37. The experience is boring with a lot of waiting around, and most seating is uncomfortable. Reading material, if available, is limited and mostly pulp fiction. The food is poor but meets nutritional requirements. During intake, you will be moved frequently and at all hours, but once you reach your final destination, the schedule becomes more regular. You can get work duty to have something to do. People generally do not bother you if you mind your own business. Most are friendly and often talkative since there is not much else to do. Many are frequent offenders, meaning they are regularly in and out of jail, so there is a lot of conversation about criminal lifestyles, which is a shared experience. Most correctional officers are simply doing their jobs and do not try to make things difficult. Some are very friendly and engage in activities like playing cards and making small talk. They want to get paid to sit around and handle as little drama as possible, which sometimes leads to strict responses like lockdowns if inmates become disruptive over issues like television channels. Story 38. Wake up, hygiene routine, boredom, stand for roll call, boredom, fight in the pod, lockdown, boredom, chow, lockdown for staff lunches, boredom, boredom. Maury comes on, boredom, stand for roll call, boredom, chow, boredom, 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 chow, boredom, recreation time, boredom, boredom, stand for roll call, lights out. Wake up and do it all over again. You can get whole shebang chips in the commissary, though, so there's that. Story 39. 2 overnights in my early 20s quickly showed me it was not a place for me. You could go from a minor issue to being involved with serious problems with people who do not care about their futures, let alone yours, very quickly. Story 40. My experiences with it have mostly been neutral. It is extremely boring but not as violent or scary as the movies depict. I know people have a wide range of experiences with different types of jails, but I had a cell to myself for most of my time. It was relatively quiet and mostly just boring and isolating. Story 41. Absolute dawdle. No wonder it is not a deterrent. Backstory. Around 18 years ago, I was on a night out in the United Kingdom. Some lads started brawling. I tried to split it up. Next thing, I got 18 months for a fray. Loads of other details, another story for another day. I ended in a Category B for 3 weeks, then a Category C. I had my own room with a television and remote, kettle, toaster, and so on. I was actually in the rugby team and we played against outside teams, only at home obviously. I had 2 pairs of boots, studs, and molded. Got extra gym time and extra association time, including snooker. I knew lads in the canteen, so I got extra milk and egg whites. I knew the lads in the kit room, so I got all the brand new clothes. I knew the lads in the servery, so I got bigger and better portions. I worked on a night shift there. We got food packs for the night too. On weekends, I wasted the time playing poker for tuna, playing rugby, training for rugby, working out in the gym, or playing snooker. The library was half decent. I have always been a good reader but had fallen out of the habit. The books I read in jail encouraged me and I still read today. I have a book with me now for the commute home after work. Story 42. First, they remove your weeds. Then you wait in the cold for a long time before it costs a lot of money. Finally, you have to pay someone to watch you urinate for a while. Story 43. Jail is difficult, as it should be. Just mind your own business and keep your mouth shut. There are always people trying to run their little scams, even in jail. Be careful and always watch your back. Story 44. I was arrested on a Friday, and their fingerprinting system went down. I stayed in a small holding cell with 5 other men until Monday morning before seeing a judge. I lay on the floor in front of the toilet, using my laceless shoe as a pillow. We received warm water and stale cheese sandwiches once a day. The drug dealers were making deals with the corrections officers for real food and getting it. There was a lot of yelling and crying. I did not get to make a phone call until I spoke to the judge. It was a bad experience. Story 45. In my opinion, I think the county jails are worse than the prisons. I have been to county jail a couple of times, but I have never been to prison, and I do not plan on going back either. Story 46. It was unpleasant, but it was just the drunk tank for 10 hours, and it was in a nice part of town. Above all else, I value my freedom. Story 47. Not as bad and rushes you to get you out due to limited space. I don't know specifics. I think prison is where they say, okay, now you're going to struggle for a while. Honestly, I guess we could use a laugh. I had a bunk partner. Of course, I'm not a queen. We all had one. But I'm shy about peeing even now at 32, or around 30 when I was there. He woke up as I was trying to pee. I told him not to look. I couldn't focus anymore and ended up peeing partly on myself and all over my pants. Then I went to sleep in my pee. Story 48. I woke up in jail after a bad night. I did not remember getting arrested. I was allowed to call cell phones from the officer's phone for a few minutes. Then he cut me off. They tried to hold me beyond what the magistrate ordered. I asked to see the magistrate, and they changed their tune immediately. Worst food ever. Story 49. A long time ago, I was a troublemaker as a kid. The small-town jails are not so bad. Do not get arrested in a big city jail. Those are very unpleasant. Story 50. I was in the county for the weekend, and it was a horrible experience. I slept as much as I could. The pod next to me was infested with lice, and all the girls had to be checked. I was a nervous wreck because I was afraid I would upset someone, start a fight, and end up staying longer. I never want to go back. Story 51. Boring, frustrating, occasionally frightening and maddening, then boring again. Thankfully, I was only in for about 100 days. Feels like hitting the pause button on your life. Story 52. I did not really care for the movie, but I think about this scene when I imagine what it is like. Let's go to prison. Story 53. The situation is boring, and you will meet people who should be in a mental hospital, not in jail. United States prison is where we put people we do not want to help, and it is very troubling. Story 54. I was a guard at a prison, not a jail, and can say without a doubt it was more depressing than anything else. There is a certain smell there, like a mix of iron and mold with a slight hint of smoke and bodily fluids. Some people are truly remorseful. Others have no care. Young men are the worst in my opinion. They have no care and blame everyone else for the situation they are in. I personally enjoyed the lifers the most. They wanted to make their time as easy as possible and caused little to no issues most of the time. Story 55. 6 months in county jail. Boring is the best way I can describe it. Fights have happened. I was involved in one because of a spades game, but mostly people sit by the television, use commissary to make unusual food concoctions, and call people to raise their phone bills. My routine was sleep, breakfast, sleep, workout, lunch, sleep, television, dinner, cards, mainly spades, sleep, repeat until it is time to go home. 0 out of 10, not recommended. Story 56. I served 9 months in a county jail. The food was very poor, like 2-day-old public school lunch. Most people kept to themselves, but there were always some trying to be the center of attention. You could tell some people did not want to be released because their jail life was better than their life outside. Showers were small, only big enough for one person, timed and supervised. There was a lot of downtime but not much to do. I read the same USA Today newspaper for 2 months. I got the best sleep of my life there and lost 30 pounds. The commissary was actually decent, and they let us on the roof for an hour each day. The guards were cool, but I am white and so were they. Story 57. In Scotland, it was just boring. Plenty of books, lots of peace and quiet. You can see a doctor the same day. So yes, they look after you, but it is dull. Story 58. The food is unappetizing. Mixing all the food together on the tray is the best option. You should probably eat it anyway, otherwise you will be hungry if you do not have a lot of commissary. Story 59. As someone who works with prisoners daily, I have never heard a redeeming quality of prison or jail. There is a reason people say it is unpleasant because it truly is. Story 60. Noise. Constant, inescapable noise. I never seemed to have a moment where I could just sit with my thoughts. Story 61. I was in county jail for the first and only time in Southern California for 18 months trying to get into a program to avoid prison for robbery. 4 months were spent in a low-level dorm with 60 people, then the rest as a kitchen trustee in a dorm with 30 people. The low-level dorm was mind-numbingly boring. It wasn't dangerous per se, but frustrating being around so many useless, moronic drug addicts. I spent most days working out and playing spades to pass the time. The kitchen made time pass much easier. The inmates were, for the most part, competent people, which is why they got the job. The dorm and living conditions improved, and we were provided perks such as a larger TV and pillows. The county-employed cooks we worked for in the kitchen were decent people and truly empathetic. Bottom line, jail is extremely boring. Most people are moronic beyond belief. The deputies range from friendly to psychopathic, and occasionally there are moments of extreme tension and violence, but not to the degree you'd find in prison. Just mind your business and be authentic, and you should be fine. Story 62. Invasive search plus X-ray of your entire body. Your glasses may be taken for a long period, even if you need them to see. Then you are placed in solitary, most likely due to overcrowding or to be segregated or sentenced. You might not be allowed out. It will be a 24/7 lockdown. If you do get to go out, weather permitting, you are enclosed with no greenery, just concrete and a basketball hoop. In my case, I have a medical condition that required me to be isolated for the entire time. My mental health was not great to begin with, and now it is a lost cause. Sometimes they provide tablets and commissary services, but sometimes not. All calls and interactions are monitored. If you need anything, requests must be submitted via a system. Officers are not required to comply, citing staffing issues, including complaints that fall under the Prison Rape Elimination Act. In such cases, your complaint will likely be dismissed, but the damage is done. Story 63. Jail is not that bad. It's like high school without the girls, of course. The food is bad, naturally. It is a good opportunity to meet different people you otherwise never would have. If you go in and be yourself, they will respect you. I am a clean-cut white man with no visible tattoos, and still never had anyone try to bully me or anything. Story 64. Prison is essentially what you make it. If you are respectful, demand respect, and know how to mind your business, you will be fine. With that comes knowing when you need to fight. If you fail to fight when necessary, the rest of your stay will be hell. Story 65. It was last year because of shoplifting. I stole a chocolate bar because my blood sugar was very low. I ate it outside the store. Police came and arrested me. I was jailed for 3 weeks. It was not fun, but it was not bad either. I followed what they said, and I was not a target there. The cellmates played cards and bet cigarettes. One guy taught me how to smoke. When I was released, the police officer said if I got caught again, I would be imprisoned. Norwegian prisons are basically like hotels. Story 66. I was in for a long weekend during coronavirus, so it was basically solitary confinement. I stayed in my cell for 23 hours and got out for an hour to shower and watch television. I committed a crime on Friday night and stayed until released on Monday afternoon. The food was terrible, so I stopped eating and lost a few pounds. I had a really bad headache from caffeine withdrawal. I read about 5 books and slept a lot. Story 67. Done overnight. Boring and dirty. You have everything hanging over you. The food is bad. I just slept and kept to myself until I could be released. Story 68. Not bad. I was 18 years old and stayed for 3 days. Most people were nice and willing to chat. I saw one man argue with a guard. Once, I was locked in my room all day for no reason. The food was terrible, absolutely awful. If I had made a meal from dirt, it would have tasted better. There were no changes of clothes, so I showered every 12 hours to control body odor. Thankfully, I did not need to use the restroom while there. I looked up my cellmate, he was a rapist or something. He did not mention that during my stay. Story 69. I worked in a county jail for a suburban county next to a major city. We had many troublemakers from the city committing crimes in our county, so it was busier than a typical rural county jail. When someone asks me what jail is like, I tell them this: I would sit and watch a bank of television screens displaying cameras placed throughout the jail. There was one camera in a dormitory-style room positioned right above an inmate's bed. During a 12-hour shift, that inmate never left his bunk except to use the restroom. For weeks on end, he just lay in his bunk under his blanket. That is what jail is like. Story 70 was in a general population pod, and the younger men really needed to bathe more. You are sharing a space the size of 2 classrooms with 39 other men. For the love of God, wash yourself. Story 71. If your life is difficult enough in the military, it can feel like a vacation. You get a lot of exercise, there is time to read, and 3 meals. Story 72. A lot of top comments say they spent time in jail but describe prison life as seen on television. This makes me question the validity of the top comments. Jail is very different from prison. Story 73. It is torture. You should be paid when it turns out you are innocent, and maybe they would not feel okay just arresting people for nothing. Story 74. I asked someone I know, based on his experience, when you are in jail, you actually have a lot of realization about life. Story 75. Not great. I was only there for a very short time, 40 days, but it gave me an insight into life I would not get elsewhere. I was very fortunate in that I worked all the time I was there, so in a way it was a little like commuting. Get up in the morning, wash, shave, go to work, back for lunch, back to work, then back to the block. I would not recommend it given the choice. Story 76. Boring as well. You really learn to know yourself. Also, never leave a book unfinished. In jail, superstition says if you leave a book uncompleted, you will return to finish it. Story 77. Fine. Met a few guys catching the chain to prison. I did 180 days in a Texas county jail. Learned how to play hearts and spades. Met some of the most interesting, intelligent, and capable people ever. Things just malfunction, and we all agreed we were here for a reason. Story 78. Weirdest experience ever. There were no fights and everyone was calm. Most of the guards treated us decently as well. It was a small town jail, maybe that is why. I expected the worst going in, fights and strange people. I actually enjoyed hanging out with the people there. Story 79. A bouncer who worked for me when we ran a bar and club ended up going to prison for assault. He was what you would describe as a tough person. I saw him a few years later when he came into my next business. We spent some time chatting, and the whole experience scared him greatly. He would never do anything that would risk him going back to prison again. Story 80. The food was unappetizing. Mentally ill individuals are not receiving proper treatment. There is a lot of manipulation and mind games. Can be very loud at times, and overall it is quite sad. Feels like a waste of money, resources, humanity, and energy. I do not recommend it. Story 81. My first time in jail was calm. The worst part was the holding cell because it was cold and noisy. Once I made it into my cell, my cellmate offered me ramen noodles and gathered a group of people, telling them that if anyone tried fighting me, I would not fight back and they would fight for me. They were all very kind. He also had some medication which he left in my cell when he was transferred. When my new cellmate arrived, I told him about it, and without asking questions, he took the medication. Story 82. I was young, 20 years old, and didn't deserve to be there. I was placed in the suicide watch tank with about a dozen other people. I only spent 3 days there, but I never slept. After about a day, a couple of inmates who had been there for over a year and were recognized as the ones who ran the cell noticed I wasn't eating. They chased off the people who wanted to take my food, which I was happy to let them do. They forced me to eat and asked why I was there. I told them my story. They agreed that I didn't deserve it and said that if they were in my shoes, they would have been in prison for murder. I ended up playing chess with anyone in the cell who wanted to play. Only the guy who made the board beat me. I read 3 or 4 books. They were not great, but it kept my mind busy. The guards paid no attention to us, except one who had a chronic issue and was kicked out of the cell within minutes. There was one strange guy trying to brag about his veins and calling me a weak punk because mine didn't pop out like his. I never said anything to him. He was behind me in line for the urine test, and someone behind him told him to be quiet. I dropped the soap in the shower. Luckily, the shower was meant for only one person. The other inmates made sure of that. The food was all right. I remember an apple and a cheese sandwich. It's been nearly 20 years, so I don't recall much else. I do remember being warned never to try jumping unless it was from very high up. There was a man with brain damage in the cell who survived a 5-story fall onto his head. Overall, it was not bad. I would not want to do it again, though. Story 83. Note to self. Become a janitor in a women's prison. While I have not been in jail, my experience with psychiatric facilities is similar in the sense that you leave those places worse than when you entered. I was a bright but aggressive kid. Now I am an outcast without purpose or future. At least I am not really aggressive anymore. Instead, I impulse shop with money I may not always have. Story 84. Not jail, but I spent my teens in psychiatric institutions, which are like jail for the mentally unstable. I had no criminal charges, just aggression issues in childhood. My experience was much like prison if you avoid the rowdy people there. Boredom, poor food, and legally questionable treatment from the staff. Legal action against them was not an option because people do not believe someone labeled as mentally ill. I was also brainwashed to believe absurd things about myself. Mainly that I was not human, that I had supernatural powers and a long criminal background. This sounds crazy now that I have been free for a decade. I believe this was done to make me seem insane and provide the institution with a better legal defense. I think this twisted brainwashing is the main difference from jail. Jail inmates are supposed to get a new start. I just became an outcast without purpose or future, despite being a bright kid before I was institutionalized. Story 85. Honestly, it depends on what you're in for and why you're there. I don't know the judicial term in English, but basically, I got in a bar fight while completely drunk, hurt the other guy to the point he had to be driven to the emergency room and spent 7 months in jail for that. Keep in mind, I don't live in the United States, so maybe my experience was different because of that. I used to work construction for a few years before that, so they let me work in jail too. I was basically a janitor there. This made my life a whole lot easier. I got out of my cell for several hours a day. The pay was ridiculously low, but still enough for me to afford much that other prisoners couldn't, and the working inmates had their own cafeteria. For lunch, I can honestly say our food was pretty good. The inmates who spent the whole day in their cell blocks always complained about the quality of their meals, so I guess we got the better stuff. Being a janitor also came with the perk of getting my own cell, as I had to get up, go to work, and come back at different times than the other inmates. The fact that I'm built rather large and was in for a violent offense also meant people rarely tried to start fights with me, as there were plenty of easier targets to pick on. I stayed out of all that trouble as well as possible, since it was my first time in jail and there was a possibility my sentence could be shortened if I did not cause any problems. The worst thing I experienced there happened right on my second night. When you come to this prison, you are brought to a special cell block at first, where your behavior towards the other inmates is monitored while the guards go through your paperwork. You are questioned about whether you're qualified and willing to work, you get a medical exam, and so on. This process can take a few days. During this time, I had a cellmate who was some punk kid, probably no older than 21, who was picked straight from the street and brought here after they found methamphetamine on him. He was clearly suffering from withdrawal, but the doctor refused to give him anything for that. As much as I pitied that guy, he was also the most annoying person to be locked up with. On my second night in a cell with this guy, I was woken in the middle of the night by him kicking my bunk bed from below. I jumped down, ready to beat the crap out of him as I had had enough of his nonsense, only to find him not kicking but spasming uncontrollably with foam building around his mouth. I immediately pressed the emergency button, but the paramedics took their time to get to our cell. He was rushed to the hospital. I was placed in another cell block after being given my job the next day. I still don't know what became of that kid or if he even survived. Story 86. If you are looking for powerful connections, look no further than the prison. You will come across some of the most likable, charismatic, and intelligent individuals, and they are right there in the jail cell with you. You will also encounter individuals who are the polar opposite. You may even question how some of them got in there to begin with. Story 87. I always tell my children that they must always obey the law because if they ever get arrested, they have to strip and undergo a thorough search. I have never been in trouble myself, but I have heard from family members that this happens. That alone terrifies me enough to want to avoid getting into trouble. Story 88. I might be like you, and this might be the answer you seek. What happens when law-abiding citizens become victims of lawfare? Me, Christian, college-educated, mother of 4, teacher, age 43 at the time. Spotless me ends up with a felony kidnapping charge in a small town. Here is how it went down. A police officer came to the door. I invited him in to chat about the civil matter, because that is what the law states to do when the matter is not criminal. The officer was expected to take a statement and wait for family court to open the next day. Nope. Click, click. Watch your head. I am in the back of a squad car being paraded down Main Street. Frank Skydersky shuffled across the street with his walker. Thankfully didn't recognize me. The officer barely slowed for the crosswalk. Thankfully, Frank made it to the curb. We get to the Sally Port, and he goes to talk to some woman who was probably wondering, "Why did you just pick up our school's gym teacher?" While I watched them talk, because I am a lean, flexible athlete, I was able to put my arms cuffed in front of me. But at the last second, I decided that messing around with the police officer was not something I wanted. He found me as he left me and brought me into the facility. At the jail, there was mayhem for a town of 1,400, because I was at the county facility. Apparently, the reservation had a meth bust and 18 of the finest officers were queued ahead of me. Plenty of time to shower. Wait, what? Yeah, you have to be kidding me. I was in a cinderblock 8 by 11-foot room that was mostly a shower and everything had rounded edges so you couldn't improvise a way to your own demise. Believe me, you think about it. 3 officers in uniforms and the original arresting officer were crammed in there with me to show me the shower. I stripped naked in front of all, explaining that I grew up in a locker room and raised 3 boys. If they made me shower, then they could watch. The officer looked funny running out of the shower room. I wished he slipped. They gave my size 0 frame orange jail clothes sized for a large pickup truck. I am never wearing Crocs again. The air temperature was in the 50s and my wet long hair made me shiver. Getting into the cell for interrogation was strange. The guy in the cell next to me was a Native American male who reminded me of the woman from the movie Kingpin. He showed me with his fingers and tongue how life in his cell would be. Classy. Time for a mug shot. Really? Now I had to wait for fingerprints because the machine was down. I told them I could help with the prints because, as a teacher in the district, I had volunteered on a field trip to that same police department. I knew how to ink my fingerprints, so they had me teach a 21-year-old officer how to do it. Swear to God. Then back to the jail with my unruly neighbor. You get to make a phone call. My cell phone was dead and I memorized 2 numbers. One phone call went to voicemail. The only other person I could call was my teenage daughter who was at her dad's house. He had just told her he had me arrested because her brother didn't want to come over. He was 12. Needless to say, she was able to get a hold of my sister at least, but it didn't matter. I would spend the night in jail and court was at 8 a.m. There are no clocks in jail. There is a concrete block with plastic wrap around what I think they call padding. It is next to the open stainless steel toilet that has a camera pointed at it. They purposely open metal doors just to slam them 24/7. At some point, I was fed pulp formed into food shapes and an orange. I peeled the orange and laughed at the slight distress I felt being forced to put the peels on the floor, as there is no garbage can in jail cells. I didn't ever think about it, but now we know. It was definitely overnight, but I didn't know how soon court was until they let me out. Yep, they just opened the door, kindly brought over my stuff and my dead phone, and told me to leave. Then they made me come back to pick up the orange peels. Okay. I bent over and picked up the peels. I stood there. The peels fell victim to gravity as I desperately searched into the eyes of Barney. Barney, oh Barney, where did I put your special orange peels? Oh yeah, the old man started looking for a can. I asked, was this your parting gift or something? Geez. I walked out the door, learned it was 6 a.m., and decided the 3-mile walk home would probably be the best thing for my psyche. As I walked past an office building, a man I know from the gym waved and mouthed, "What?" through the window due to the time. "What are you doing out here?" So I got a ride home and yeah, that was it. Story 89. I have been arrested 4 times in my life for my involvement in protests, never charged, and always made bail within 24 hours. The charges were always dropped, so my experience is limited. What has always stood out to me is how dehumanizing the experience is and how powerless and vulnerable you feel. The police officers and deputies are unpleasant, often give arbitrary or conflicting instructions, and even the smallest disrespect or failure to comply puts you in significant physical danger. Story 90. My son will be released from prison in a little over a week. He has been stabbed, hit in the face with a padlock, and beaten up during the 5 years he has been incarcerated. Everything about it is terrible, from communication to the commissary. It is also a financial ripoff. He is only 24. Story 91. Very boring, but it varies based on luck. You might get lucky and be locked up with a group of semi-normal people and actually have civil conversations. You might get unlucky and be locked up with a group of 60 IQ knuckle-draggers who have been incarcerated since childhood and only know how to make everyone else's life miserable. Or even worse, be locked up with a group who are not your race and have to put up with their nonsense 24/7. I was locked up over 40 years ago, and to this day I absolutely hate basketball. Food is inedible. Everything is covered in grime and filth. There is no privacy. Some guards are somewhat empathetic, but most are sadistic morons. The experience is very dehumanizing and barbaric, making you not want to go back 100%. Story 92. Same as any other government institution. The Army, public schools, court, the Department of Motor Vehicles, just more of the same. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.